Welcome back to The Sleepy Scientist, where the stars are always out, the pace is always gentle, and the universe has a bedtime story just waiting to be told. Whether you're curled up under the covers, nestled into your favourite chair, or drifting off on a train ride home, this video is here to help you relax, unwind, and maybe even drift off into a well-deserved rest. Tonight we're exploring something subtle, quiet, and ever-present. Just like sleep itself, it's called inertia. You've probably felt it today without even knowing. It's why your coffee kept going when your feet suddenly stopped. It's why a car keeps rolling even when your foot lifts off the gas. And it's why planets just can't help but keep dancing around stars. Inertia is the universe's way of saying, "I'm good right here, thanks." Now, I should probably warn you, I hope this video isn't so interesting that it keeps you awake. But if it does, at least you'll drift off with some curious new facts tucked gently under your pillow. If you're enjoying these sleepy science stories, a like or a gentle tap on that subscribe button would mean a lot. It helps this little corner of the internet stay warm and well lit. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Midnight in Madrid, 2 in the morning in Toronto. I love seeing just how far these calm currents travel. We'll take our time with this one. No rush, no pressure. Just an easy stroll through one of physics' quietest forces. So breathe deeply, soften your gaze, and let's begin. And as always, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and is not intended to serve as medical advice. Inertia is one of those strange, elegant truths of the universe that doesn't shout. It hums. It's always there, always working, and yet it rarely gets the spotlight. It's the cosmic equivalent of a cat sitting on a sunny windowsill, perfectly still, until something nudges it, and even then it takes its time. At its core, inertia is the tendency of things to keep doing what they're already doing. If they're at rest, they want to stay at rest. If they're in motion, they want to keep going. And not in a metaphorical way, in a real physical can't-help-it way. Let's start with something gentle. Picture a quiet room, a smooth wooden table, and a sleeping coin resting at the centre. It's not moving, it's just sitting there, perfectly content. You could stare at it for hours, and unless the table is tilted or the wind conspires against you, it won't budge. This isn't laziness, it's physics. That coin has inertia. It doesn't care that you're watching. It doesn't need to do anything. It's happy in its current state, and it will stay that way unless something acts on it. Now give it a nudge, a little flick. Suddenly it glides across the table, smooth as silk. That same coin, moments ago so committed to doing nothing, is now equally committed to motion, and unless friction or another force slows it down, it would keep moving forever. This is inertia. Sir Isaac Newton put it more formally, though probably with fewer cats and coins. His first law of motion states, an object in motion will stay in motion at a constant velocity, and an object at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by an external force. It sounds simple. It is simple, but simple in that kind of quiet, genius way that makes you wonder how it wasn't obvious all along. Before Newton, people believed all sorts of things about motion. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle thought that things only stayed in motion if something kept pushing them. According to him, if you threw a ball, it moved forward because the air behind it rushed in to keep pushing it along. As you can imagine, this didn't quite hold up once people started looking closer. Galileo Galilei was the one who cracked the door open, noticing that a ball rolling on a perfectly smooth surface wouldn't slow down unless something interfered, like friction or a bump. And Newton burst that door wide open with a framework that still shapes physics today. What inertia really teaches us is that stillness and motion are not opposites. They are in fact siblings, equally natural states. The universe doesn't play favourites. If something is already moving, it doesn't need a reason to keep going. It just needs space and freedom from interference. The only thing that ever changes that course is force. A shove, a bump, gravity, air resistance, a brick wall. All these are forces. In their absence, motion simply continues, peacefully and predictably. That might sound a bit abstract, but you've experienced it plenty of times. Imagine riding in a car. When the driver suddenly hits the brakes, your body keeps moving forward. That's not magic. That's inertia. Your body was in motion, just like the car, and when the car stopped, your body tried to continue. This is why we have seatbelts, to apply a force to stop your forward motion in a safe, controlled way. If you've ever felt your bag fall over when the bus lurches forward, or your drink slosh out of the cup when you take a sharp turn, you've been personally introduced to inertia. It's not being difficult, it's just obeying the rules. In the vacuum of space, where there's very little friction or resistance, inertia becomes dramatically obvious. When a spacecraft shuts off its engines, it doesn't stop. It doesn't even slow down. It keeps coasting, quiet, determined and obedient to Newton's law. This is why satellites, once placed into orbit with the right speed and direction, can circle a planet for decades with minimal adjustment. Nothing is pushing them. They're simply continuing the motion they already had, gliding through a medium that offers no objection. But inertia is more than just a rule for rolling objects and rocket ships. It's a statement about how the universe behaves. It tells us that things don't need a reason to stay the way they are. Rest doesn't require justification. Motion doesn't either. That might sound philosophical, and in a way it is. Inertia is the universe's way of saying, if nothing changes, nothing changes. Of course, in the real world, things are constantly interacting. Forces are everywhere. Air pushes back, friction rubs, gravity pulls. This is why we don't see objects sliding endlessly across tables or floating gently through living rooms. The Earth is a busy place, but the law still holds true. Underneath it all, every object still clings to its current state, resisting change unless a force demands otherwise. This principle, this quiet truth, is the foundation of classical mechanics. Without it, we couldn't explain why planes need engines, or why bicycles topple when they slow down. It's what makes juggling possible, what makes bowling pins scatter, and what causes your laundry to fly across the room when you slam on the brakes with a basket in the back seat. Inertia is the background rhythm of the physical world, so woven into daily experience that we often miss it completely. And here's something quietly wonderful. Inertia has no preferred direction. It doesn't care which way an object is going. It doesn't favour rest over motion, or motion over rest. It doesn't favour up or down, left or right, fast or slow. It simply supports the status quo. And in that way, inertia is almost a lesson in patience, a kind of physics version of mindfulness. Everything moves or stays still exactly as it is, until something gives it a reason to do otherwise. There's beauty in that constancy, a kind of peace. Inertia reminds us that not all change is automatic, that motion needs motivation, that rest is not weakness, it's just another form of being. It's easy to overlook because it's not flashy. It doesn't sparkle or snap, but that very stillness is what gives it power. Inertia holds the moon in orbit, shapes the dance of galaxies, and nudges your body forward when the train stops too fast. It's a gentle force, but a persistent one, quiet, stubborn, and utterly universal. And now, if your eyes are getting heavy, inertia might be working on you too. The body at rest tends to stay at rest. Pillows help, so do warm blankets, and maybe, just maybe, so does a gentle lesson about the nature of motion. Long before Newton ever pondered why apples fall, or why the moon never crashes into the earth, people were already thinking deeply about motion. They had to. After all, rocks fell, birds flew, carts rolled, and arrows arced through the sky. Something was clearly going on. But in the ancient world, the laws of motion weren't written in mathematical formulas. They were written in stories, philosophy, and a generous helping of creative guesswork. The most influential thinker in this early arena was Aristotle, a man who, for all his brilliance, didn't always get physics quite right. But that didn't stop his ideas from dominating science for nearly 2,000 years. To understand why, we have to remember that Aristotle wasn't just a philosopher, he was the philosopher. In ancient Greece, his word was almost law. If Aristotle said rocks fall because they miss their friends in the centre of the earth, well, people just sort of nodded and said, fair enough. At the heart of Aristotle's worldview was the idea that everything had a natural place. Earth and water wanted to go down, air and fire wanted to go up. The heavens? They were something else entirely, made of a special fifth element, the quintessence, moving in perfect, eternal circles. Motion, in Aristotle's eyes, was less about force and more about purpose. Things moved because they were trying to reach where they belonged, like homesick teenagers of the cosmos. This idea was deeply satisfying in its own poetic way. Drop a stone, and it falls, because its natural place is down below. Light a flame, and it rises, because fire belongs in the sky. Everything had its assigned seat in the grand cosmic theatre, and when something was out of place it moved to correct itself. But this view came with a few complications. Aristotle believed that for something to stay in motion, something else had to keep pushing it. Imagine a wagon rolling down the road. In Aristotle's world, once you stop pulling it, it should stop moving immediately. After all, what else would keep it going? Of course, anyone who's ever pushed a shopping cart knows that things can keep rolling a bit even after you let go. But Aristotle explained this away by saying the air behind the object rushes in and keeps pushing it forward. Yes, he thought the air was chasing your wagon. It sounds funny now, but without a clear understanding of friction, momentum, or inertia, this was a genuine attempt to make sense of the world. In fact, Aristotle's thinking wasn't foolish. It was just limited by the tools and knowledge available at the time. He didn't have access to smooth, frictionless surfaces or precision instruments. He had rocks, ropes, wood, and wind. And given that, his ideas made a kind of intuitive sense. Besides, he wasn't completely wrong about everything. He correctly noted that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, or so it seemed. Drop a hammer and a feather, and the hammer definitely wins the race. Unless, of course, you're standing on the moon, where they fall side by side in beautiful synchrony, proving that in a vacuum, all objects accelerate at the same rate. But Aristotle didn't have a vacuum. He had Earth's atmosphere and gravity and intuition, and that intuition told him that heavier things fall faster because they have more of the earthy element in them. One of the most striking beliefs Aristotle held was that the heavens and the earth were governed by entirely separate rules. The sky was the realm of perfection, unchanging, circular, divine. The earth, by contrast, was the land of chaos and straight lines and eventual decay. This cosmic divide meant that the moon and planets didn't need explanations like inertia or gravity. They simply moved in circles because that's what heavenly bodies did. They were made of finer stuff. And yet, this idea of different rules for different realms stuck around for centuries. Even into the Renaissance, people still imagined the universe in layers, the imperfect Earth at the centre, surrounded by nested crystalline spheres carrying planets and stars in elegant circles. It was a beautiful vision, just completely wrong. But perhaps the most charming feature of Aristotle's physics was his belief in purpose-driven motion. He thought things moved because they had a goal, an intent, even if they couldn't talk about it. An arrow flew, not just because it had been launched, but because it wanted to reach its target. Water flowed downhill, not just because of gravity, but because that's where it belonged. In a way, he gave the universe a kind of quiet personality, where objects had desires and destinies. It's not scientific, but it is oddly comforting. Still, the cracks in Aristotle's theories were always there, waiting to be noticed. Take the classic example of a rock rolling across the ground. According to Aristotle, once you stop pushing it, it stops because the force has ended. But in reality, even without a push, the rock keeps going, at least for a little while, until friction and bumps bring it to a halt. The force isn't vanishing, it's just being countered by other forces. Aristotle didn't understand that motion could persist without constant pushing. if those opposing forces were removed or minimized. In fact, one of the reasons Aristotle's ideas lasted so long is that nature tends to obscure the truth with complications. On Earth, friction is everywhere. Air resistance is ever present. Almost nothing moves without being slowed down by something else. So it's easy to think that motion requires ongoing effort. Without the ability to eliminate those interfering forces, ancient observers had no way of uncovering the deeper laws underneath. It wasn't until over 1,000 years later that thinkers began to seriously challenge these ideas. But even when early scientists began experimenting with motion, Aristotle's influence loomed large. His teachings were enshrined in universities. To question him was, at times, to question the very structure of learning. And yet, as observations became more precise and experiments more sophisticated, reality began to speak more clearly. The celestial spheres didn't hold up under scrutiny. The planets didn't behave as Aristotle said they should. Arrows flew and continued flying without any wind behind them. Stones rolled, and in certain setups they didn't stop nearly as soon as one would expect. The universe, it turned out, didn't care much for human stories about purpose and place. It followed rules, consistent, elegant, and discoverable. Still, it's important to appreciate what Aristotle gave us. He wasn't just guessing, he was reasoning. He was looking at the world and trying to explain it, not with magic or myth, but with logic. Even when he was wrong, he was moving science forward, creating a foundation for others to build upon, or in some cases knock down and replace. His legacy reminds us that science is a journey, not a destination. Each idea, even the misguided ones, helps us get closer to the truth. And in that light, Aristotle wasn't a failure of physics. He was a pioneer navigating the dark with a candle. It's strangely fitting that a man who misunderstood inertia so deeply still became part of the long chain of motion that led to our understanding of it. Ideas move too. They gather speed, get reshaped, meet resistance, and sometimes fly farther than anyone could have predicted. And Aristotle? He set that ball rolling. Galileo Galilei had a thing for dropping stuff. Not in the clumsy, oops my mug way, but in the curious, scientific, let's see what happens kind of way. He was the sort of person who looked at the world and thought, this doesn't quite add up, and then rolled balls down ramps until the universe started making more sense. Where others saw motion and simply accepted it, Galileo asked why, and more importantly how. In a time when Aristotle's teachings still echoed through the halls of universities, Galileo began poking holes in some very old and very stubborn ideas, like the notion that objects only move because something is constantly pushing them. To most of the world at the time, that seemed reasonable. You push a cart, it moves. Stop pushing, it stops. Clearly it needs the push to keep going, right? But Galileo wasn't buying it. He started doing something that in hindsight feels incredibly obvious. He tested it. He didn't just sit and ponder. He built ramps, rolled spheres, and timed them as best he could with the rudimentary clocks and pendulums of his day. He used inclined planes to slow everything down. After all, things fall quickly, too quickly to observe properly with the naked eye and no stopwatch. But when you roll them down a gentle slope, they take their time, and their secrets begin to unfold. What he discovered was subtle but profound. When a ball rolls down one slope and up another, it tends to roll back up to the same height it started from. Steeper incline or shallow, longer ramp or shorter, if you let the ball go, it always tries to return to its original level. That's just how energy works. Now here's the brilliant part. Galileo wondered, what if the second incline was less steep? The ball would roll farther to reach the same height, but it would still try. And what if the second incline was even gentler? The ball would roll even farther. And then he asked the obvious next question. What if the second ramp was perfectly flat? His conclusion? The ball would just keep rolling, forever. That sounds awfully familiar today because we know this as inertia, but back then it was a wild idea. It meant motion didn't need a cause to continue. It only needed a cause to begin. Once set in motion, something would just keep going unless something else got in the way, like friction, or a wall, or gravity. Motion, in its purest form, is natural and persistent. That was revolutionary. This didn't sit well with the Aristotelian worldview, which leaned heavily on the idea that constant motion required constant effort. Galileo, in essence, said, "No, the real troublemaker here isn't the lack of pushing, it's friction." And what a troublemaker it is. Friction is the reason your skateboard doesn't coast forever, why your sock stops sliding across the kitchen floor, and why a marble doesn't keep going until it hits the living room wall. It's the ever-present drag of surfaces interacting, tiny bumps and grooves catching on one another, microscopic hills and valleys locking into place and stealing energy little by little. To Galileo, friction was the invisible hand that confused everyone. It tricked people into thinking that motion naturally faded away, but remove friction, or at least reduce it, and suddenly things move more freely, more persistently. It's like pulling the curtain back on the wizard. The magic wasn't magic at all. It was resistance. Of course, in his day, Galileo couldn't eliminate friction entirely. He didn't have vacuum chambers or air bearings, but he could reduce it enough with smooth ramps and polished spheres to see the pattern. The flatter the surface, the longer the roll. The gentler the incline, the closer to eternal motion he got. He was building the scaffolding for Newton's first law, even if he didn't have the final wording yet. Galileo's willingness to test, to doubt, and to measure made him an early pioneer of the scientific method. He wasn't content with theories that sounded good. He wanted numbers, observations, and repeatable results, and his methods were surprisingly clever. Without precise clocks, he used the swing of a pendulum, or the rhythm of dripping water to time how long balls took to roll down various inclines. Primitive? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. His work didn't stop at ramps. He also tackled free fall, showing that objects of different masses fall at the same rate in the absence of air resistance. The famous story of Galileo dropping 2 spheres from the Leaning Tower of Pisa may be more legend than fact, but the point stands. He shattered the old idea that heavier things fall faster. They don't. They just push through air more aggressively. But back to those ramps. Galileo's ramps were more than wooden angles. They were thought experiments made real. By watching what happened when objects were allowed to move with minimal interference, he revealed the underlying simplicity of motion. He showed that the natural state of a moving object isn't to slow down, it's to keep moving. Friction just tricks us into thinking otherwise. And while we're here, let's give a gentle nod to air resistance, friction's wispy cousin. Air drags on things. It slows them down in ways that aren't always obvious. A feather floats not because it's lighter in some magical sense, but because it has a large surface area and very little mass. It gets pushed around by the air more easily than a hammer. Galileo saw through that illusion too. He realized that in the absence of air, both would fall together. He understood that what we observe is often filtered through forces we don't notice. It's not that the universe is lying, it's just that it's complicated. Galileo's work laid the groundwork for modern physics, but he did it with a playfulness and curiosity that still resonates. He didn't have calculus or lasers or vacuum-sealed labs. He had balls, ramps, ropes, and a head full of questions, and he used them to tease out truths that had eluded humanity for centuries. It's hard not to admire that kind of determination, or to enjoy the gentle irony that his great revelation, that motion is natural, was discovered by making things roll down slippery slopes. And there's something deeply comforting in the idea that the universe doesn't need constant maintenance. Motion, once begun, doesn't fade into nothingness just because nobody's watching. It continues, steadily and silently, unless something gets in the way. That's not just physics. That's poetry in motion. Of course, Galileo didn't stop with balls and ramps. He also pointed telescopes at the sky and saw moons orbiting Jupiter, little worlds refusing to orbit Earth, defying the old belief that everything circled us. He saw sunspots, imperfections on what was supposed to be a flawless heavenly body, he saw evidence that the cosmos didn't play by Aristotle's rules at all. But even among the stars, it all came back to motion. Circles, spirals, tilts, spins. Things moving because they had once been moved, and nothing had stopped them since. Galileo reminded us that the universe is not powered by constant pushing, but by initial nudges and the absence of interference. He brought motion down from the heavens and showed that it works the same way on Earth as it does in space, that the rules are universal, not divided between sky and soil, and all of it started with a few carefully placed ramps and the quiet hum of rolling spheres. In the end, Galileo's legacy is not just about what he discovered, but how he discovered it. Through observation, patience, and a willingness to question what everyone else took for granted. Through the recognition that sometimes the truth is hidden not by mystery but by friction. That resistance is not always a sign of what's natural, it's just a sign of what's in the way. And once you know that, the world becomes a little clearer, and maybe, just maybe, a little smoother too. Sir Isaac Newton had a knack for noticing what everyone else overlooked. While others were busy watching things fall, he wondered why they fell, and more interestingly, why they kept moving once they started. And so, tucked quietly at the very beginning of his grand 3 laws of motion, sits the most deceptively simple idea in all of classical physics, Newton's first law. It's sometimes called the law of inertia. But in more poetic circles, or possibly just lazy ones, it's known as the law of laziness. Not because Newton was lazy himself, far from it, but because the objects he studied seemed to prefer doing nothing new. An object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion stays in motion, moving in a straight line at a constant speed, unless something forces it to change. That's it. That's the law. And it might sound like common sense now, but when Newton wrote it down in the late 17th century, it was anything but obvious. Most people still believe that things naturally slowed down over time, that motion faded without effort. Newton, building on the work of Galileo, said, "No, it's the other way around. Motion doesn't fade on its own. It continues tirelessly unless something interferes. That interference could be friction, gravity, a wall, a gust of wind, or a rogue banana peel. But without that nudge, a moving object will simply keep going, quietly, eternally, blissfully committed to its course." Now, this might feel like a bit of a letdown. You expect a grand scientific law to do something dramatic, something exciting. But Newton's first law isn't flashy. It doesn't make things move. It just explains what happens after they start. It tells us that in the absence of forces, nature doesn't press the brakes, it just cruises. One of the reasons this law feels so subtle is because we rarely see it in action. Earth is full of forces conspiring to ruin a perfectly good coast. There's air resistance, bumping into things, or good old friction stealing momentum little by little. If you give a toy car a push, it rolls for a bit then stops. Not because motion fades, but because the wheels drag, the floor pushes back, and the air resists. But imagine a place where none of that existed, where no friction pulled you down, where no breeze slowed you down. In deep space, that toy car would just keep going, forever. That's the purest expression of Newton's first law. Motion uninterrupted. And then there's the other half of the law. Objects at rest tend to stay that way too. This is perhaps the more relatable part. Anyone who has tried to get out of bed on a chilly morning knows just how stubborn rest can be. The body, once settled, doesn't leap into action without reason. And in physics, it's the same. If a rock is lying on the ground, it's not going anywhere unless something acts on it. You need a push, a pull, a gravitational shove, something to break the stillness. Otherwise, it just continues resting. At the heart of all this is mass. Mass isn't just how heavy something feels. It's a measure of how much stuff there is, how much inertia an object has. The more mass, the more it resists changes to its motion. A ping-pong ball and a bowling ball might sit perfectly still on a table, but try to push them both, and you'll notice the difference. The bowling ball doesn't want to move. It takes effort. That's inertia in action. The same goes for stopping them. Once the bowling ball is rolling, it doesn't want to stop. It takes just as much effort to slow it down as it did to get it going. This is why we associate mass with momentum. Momentum is the product of mass and velocity. The more mass something has, or the faster it's moving, the more momentum it carries, and the harder it is to change its motion. That's why massive ships don't turn on a dime. They have momentum and inertia, and they're not easily impressed by little requests to change direction. There's a certain elegance to how the first law fits into the rest of physics. It sets the stage for everything that follows. It tells us that change requires cause, that stillness and motion are equal players in the game. Neither is more natural, neither is more noble, they're just two sides of the same equation. And inertia sits quietly in the middle, making sure the universe doesn't shift without a reason. Of course, this law doesn't mean that motion is immune to change, just that change requires force. When you kick a soccer ball, you're applying a force. You overcome its inertia. When a car crashes into a tree, it's a violent reminder that a moving object needs something pretty solid to stop it. And if you've ever tried to move a sofa that's been in the same spot for 5 years, you've felt firsthand how mass and friction form an unholy alliance to resist your plans. Even within the cosmos, Newton's first law holds strong. The planets, stars and galaxies drift, spin and sail through space, not because someone is pushing them, but because they were set in motion long ago. And because there's very little out there to slow them down, they just keep moving. Vast spirals of stars, entire solar systems, drifting through space with ancient momentum. They are, quite literally, obeying the law of laziness. And it works in both directions. Not only does motion persist without interference, but stopping something that's moving also takes real effort. This is why stopping a train is a very different challenge from stopping a tricycle. Same idea, different mass. The train has more inertia, more resistance to change, more determination in a way. All of this ties back to one simple but profound idea. Things resist change. Not because they're stubborn, not because they're lazy in the emotional sense, but because that's how mass and motion behave. Inertia is built into the structure of matter itself. Every atom, every particle, every hunk of rock and stream of gas is quietly following the same rule. And somehow that's comforting, because it means the universe isn't chaotic, it's not random. It follows patterns, gentle ones, predictable ones. If you push something, it moves. If you don't, it doesn't. And unless something gets in the way, it keeps doing what it's doing, whether that's sitting still or moving through space at thousands of kilometers per hour. The law also helps us make sense of balance. If a person stands still, it's not because they're frozen in time, it's because the forces acting on them are balanced. Gravity pulls them down, but the ground pushes back with equal strength. They're not moving because nothing has unbalanced the scales. The moment something does, a gust of wind, a shove, a trip over a cat, they move. Inertia is neutral. It only resists the change. That neutrality is part of what makes Newton's first law so graceful. It doesn't command things to behave, it just describes what they do naturally. It doesn't require motion or rest to be better or worse. It simply accepts the current state and preserves it, unless something else steps in. In a way, this law invites us to think more carefully about cause and effect. If something changes, if it speeds up, slows down, or veers off course, it didn't do so on its own. Something acted on it. There's always a reason, and sometimes discovering that reason is the first step toward understanding the whole system. It's a quiet law, a patient law. It doesn't shout or demand attention, but without it, physics would have no foundation. It is the cosmic equivalent of don't fix what isn't broken. If things are still, they stay still. If things are moving, they stay moving, until something gives them a nudge. And maybe that's not just a principle of physics. Maybe it's also a gentle reminder that change doesn't happen without input, that sometimes the hardest part of doing something new is overcoming the stillness that came before it. But once you're in motion, Well, you might just stay that way. Friction is one of those forces that doesn't get the glamorous spotlight. It's not as dramatic as gravity, not as mysterious as magnetism, and not as flashy as electricity. But without it, your life would be an endless slapstick routine of uncontrollable sliding and accidental cartwheels. Friction is what lets you walk, drive, write, grip, sit, stop, start, and generally exist in a way that doesn't resemble a skating penguin on a waxed floor. It's invisible, but it's everywhere, and it's the reason motion doesn't always behave the way you'd expect. According to Inertia, once something is moving, it should keep going at the same speed in a straight line unless something acts on it. That something is often friction, silently plotting its little resistances every time you try to coast. It's like the universe's default brake system, gently slowing everything down whether you asked for it or not. Take a simple example. Pushing a book across a table, give it a shove, and it slides for a moment before coming to a stop. At first glance, it seems like the book just got tired, but that's not it. The book didn't stop because motion fades. It stopped because friction between the book and the table quietly whispered, "That's enough of that," and went to work. Friction is the force that opposes motion between two surfaces that are in contact. It comes in different flavors, but the most common types are static friction and kinetic friction. Static friction is what stops your foot from sliding the instant you step on the ground. It's the force that holds things still. Once an object starts moving, it transitions into kinetic friction, the force that resists sliding motion. Kinetic friction is usually a bit weaker than static, which is why getting something started is often harder than keeping it moving. Now, if friction only lived between solid surfaces, things would be simpler, but it has airborne cousins. Air resistance, also known as drag, is friction's way of saying, even if you're flying, I'm still watching you. It slows down anything moving through the air, from baseballs to bicycles to breezy umbrellas that turn inside out at the worst possible time. Air resistance works by pushing back against the motion of an object. The faster you go, the more the air pushes. At low speeds, it's barely noticeable. At high speeds, it becomes a powerful adversary. This is why cars are designed to be aerodynamic, and why skydivers reach a terminal velocity. They're no longer accelerating because the force of air resistance balances out the force of gravity. It's a tug of war between falling and floating. In the vacuum of space, where there's no air to push back, things get weird. Push an object out there, and it just keeps going. No air, no drag, no friction. It doesn't slow down, not even a little. That's pure, beautiful inertia in action. But on Earth, friction is always in the mix. It's what makes real-world motion feel different from textbook motion. One of the most curious things about friction is that it's not caused by some exotic, invisible particle or mysterious force field. It's just surfaces being imperfect. Even the smoothest table you've ever touched is actually a jagged mountain range if you zoom in close enough. When two surfaces rub together, those tiny bumps and ridges snag and collide. The more contact, the more friction. Add in a little adhesion, where molecules from one surface cling to another, and you've got yourself a full-blown resistance party. Think of it like two Velcro straps being pulled apart. Each little hook and loop gets in the way, slowing everything down. Only instead of Velcro, it's atoms. Zillions of them, catching, bouncing, grinding and saying, "Nope, you shall not glide." Friction is also the reason your car can go around a curve without flying off the road. The tyres grip the asphalt because of friction. If that grip disappears, say, on an icy street, or during a particularly bad idea involving banana peels, your tyres stop pushing against the road and your car keeps going in a straight line. Not ideal if the road is curving. In that moment, you're seeing Newton's first law playing out in the most inconvenient way possible. Inertia wants to continue forward, but without friction, you can't steer or stop. You just slide and hope for the best. There are times when we want friction to be high, like when we're climbing stairs or trying not to drop a stack of plates. But there are also times we want as little of it as possible. Ice skaters rely on low friction to glide effortlessly. Engineers reduce friction in engines and machines using lubricants like oil or graphite. Spacecraft are designed to minimize friction, with the atmosphere on re-entry to avoid turning into a very expensive shooting star. But friction isn't just mechanical, it's deeply personal. Have you ever tried dragging a couch across a carpet? That resistance is friction in its most vengeful form. The couch doesn't want to move, and every tiny fibre in the rug is working against you. The heavier the object, the more it presses into the surface below, increasing the friction. That's why lighter things are easier to move. They don't press down as hard, and fewer of their microscopic hills and valleys are getting jammed together. Interestingly, friction is not always a bad thing. Without it, most modern conveniences wouldn't exist. You couldn't grip a pencil, type on a keyboard, or stop a bicycle. Your shoes would be nothing more than decorative footbags. Even fire owes something to friction. Rubbing sticks together generates heat through friction, enough to ignite dry material if you're patient and determined, or just desperate enough on a camping trip. But even with all its benefits, friction can be sneaky. It tricks us into believing that motion fades naturally, that if we throw a ball, it slows down on its own. But what's really happening is that the ball is battling the air and the ground and losing little by little. Friction is the thief that steals motion, not maliciously, just reliably. It's also worth noting that friction behaves differently on different surfaces. Sliding a book across glass feels different than sliding it across sandpaper. That's because each material has its own coefficient of friction, a number that tells us how grabby it is. Ice has a low coefficient, which is why penguins look so graceful and humans look like startled penguins. Rubber has a high one, which is why tires and sneakers are made from it. Engineers and designers spend a lot of time figuring out the right balance of friction for each situation, enough to provide grip, but not so much that everything grinds to a halt. And while we're on the topic of grinding, let's take a moment to appreciate how friction causes wear. Those same microscopic bumps that slow things down also cause materials to break down over time. Shoe soles wear thin, gears lose their teeth. Wind and sand polish rocks over thousands of years. Friction slowly and patiently reshapes the world. Even sound has a relationship with friction. Rubbing two objects together can create vibrations that turn into sound waves. That's how violins sing and how fingernails on a chalkboard scream. It's friction turning motion into vibration, vibration into noise. Despite all its quirks and occasional inconveniences, friction is a deeply important part of how the universe works. It's the great equalizer of motion, always present, always balancing the enthusiasm of movement with a bit of gentle resistance. It keeps us grounded, literally and figuratively. So next time your socks stick to the carpet, your brakes squeak, or your pen stubbornly refuses to glide across the page, just remember, it's not personal. It's just friction, doing what it does best, slowing things down, smoothing things out, and quietly making sure the world doesn't slide completely off the rails. Mass is one of those things we think we understand until we're asked to explain it. We use the word all the time: massive headache, massive sandwich, a massive confusion. But in physics, mass has a very specific and surprisingly elegant meaning. It's not just about how much something weighs, it's about how much it resists change. At its core, mass is a measure of inertia. It tells us how much an object wants to keep doing what it's already doing. If it's at rest, mass helps it stay at rest. If it's in motion, mass helps it keep moving. The more mass something has, the more it resists any effort to speed it up, slow it down, or change its direction. In other words, big things are stubborn. Not emotionally, but physically. Let's take a shopping cart as an example. An empty cart glides easily down the aisle, almost dancing on its squeaky wheels. But fill it with 100 cans of soup and a watermelon, and suddenly you've got a reluctant beast that takes effort to push, and even more effort to stop. The cart's mass hasn't changed how fast it could move. It's changed how hard it is to make it move. That's the key. It's a common mix-up, mass versus weight. They're related, but they're not the same. Weight is the force of gravity acting on mass. It changes depending on where you are in the universe. On the moon, you'd weigh less because gravity is weaker, but your mass, your resistance to acceleration, would be exactly the same. If someone tried to push you into motion on the moon, you'd still give them a run for their money. That's because mass is intrinsic. It's baked into the object. It doesn't care where you are, how you're feeling, or whether or not the local gravity is having a lazy day. It simply is. A bowling ball has more mass than a tennis ball, no matter what planet you're standing on. This resistance to acceleration is central to Newton's second law, which relates force, mass, and acceleration with a simple equation: force equals mass times acceleration. That means the more mass something has, the more force you need to accelerate it. Try pushing a parked car. It doesn't leap forward just because you believe in yourself. It requires serious effort. That's mass showing up to the conversation and saying, "not so fast." Now imagine trying to stop a moving train. The train isn't going particularly fast, but it has so much mass that slowing it down becomes an ordeal involving screeching brakes, sparks, and several football fields of track. On the flip side, a fly zipping through the air can be stopped mid-flight by a screen door, a breeze, or your forehead. Both objects are moving, but the train has far more mass and therefore far more momentum. That means more force is needed to change its motion. Momentum, by the way, is another concept tied tightly to mass. It's the product of mass and velocity. Double the mass, double the momentum, double the speed, and you guessed it, double the momentum again. It's what gives moving things their punch. A ping-pong ball and a cannonball might be travelling at the same speed, but one of them is going to leave a much bigger dent. That's momentum in action, and mass is a big part of that equation. In practical terms, mass determines how objects respond to force. Think of trying to throw a baseball versus a bowling ball. You can use the same arm, the same effort, and the same dramatic wind-up, but the results will be very different. The baseball soars, the bowling ball flops. The difference isn't you, it's the mass. The baseball is more easily accelerated because it resists change less. The bowling ball is stubborn and requires far more force to achieve the same speed. Interestingly, mass doesn't just resist starting motion, it resists changing motion too. If something is already moving, mass makes it harder to turn or slow down. This is why trucks can't stop on a dime, and why larger ships need more space to turn. Their mass isn't just about how heavy they are, it's about how much momentum they carry, and how much effort it takes to steer or slow them. In space, this gets even more dramatic. A satellite in orbit, with no air resistance or friction to slow it down, just keeps going. Its mass helps it stay on its path, resisting any attempts to divert it. This is why spacecraft require carefully calculated thrust to change direction. Even a small adjustment takes precision, because mass and inertia are always at play, gently but firmly resisting every nudge. But mass isn't just a brute force obstacle, it's also a fundamental property of matter. Every atom has mass. Every proton, neutron, and electron contributes to the mass of the universe. And yet, the reason these particles have mass is one of the great mysteries of physics. Enter the Higgs field, a sort of cosmic molasses that particles move through. The more a particle interacts with this field, the more mass it has. This idea helped lead to the discovery of the Higgs boson, often called the God particle, although that nickname makes physicists wince a little. Regardless, it's a reminder that mass, for all its everyday familiarity, has roots in some very strange territory. Back on Earth, we live with mass every day, whether we're aware of it or not. It's why pushing a door open takes a little effort, and why throwing a snowball is easier than throwing a frozen turkey. It explains why you feel a jolt when your bus suddenly accelerates. Your body, full of mass, is resisting that change until the seat or the floor says otherwise. Even sitting still, mass plays a role. When you're perched on a chair, your mass presses down on it, and the chair pushes back with an equal force. That balance keeps you comfortably seated rather than sinking into the floor. Without mass, you'd be a ghost. Without resistance, you'd be chaos. Mass gives us physical presence, it gives us stability, and yes, sometimes mass is a bit inconvenient. It makes moving heavy furniture a pain. It complicates travel, shipping, lifting and launching. But it also makes the world coherent, predictable. It ensures that motion isn't chaotic, but orderly. That effort is needed to make things happen, and that once they happen, they don't change direction without a good reason. In fact, the resistance that comes with mass is a kind of built-in safety mechanism. It means that things don't start flying around just because a breeze passes by, that your bookshelf doesn't tumble every time you sneeze. That movement, once begun, carries meaning. It costs energy, it takes thought. Mass is often misunderstood as just how heavy something is, but it's really so much more. It's what gives matter its dignity, its reluctance to be pushed around, its deep cosmic preference for consistency. And once you start seeing mass not just as a number on a scale, but as a measure of how much something resists change, it changes how you see everything, from a parked car to a falling apple to a spinning galaxy. It turns out that to be heavy isn't just to weigh more, it's to push back against change, to say, in the quiet language of physics, you'll need to try a little harder than that. And that stubbornness, that gentle resistance, is one of the universe's most essential traits. Whether you're throwing a baseball or launching a rocket, mass is always there, steady, resistant, and wonderfully reliable. It's a peaceful morning. You've got your coffee in hand, a warm little cup of motivation, and you're walking through your kitchen or maybe down the hall to your desk. Life feels calm, balanced, until it happens. One sudden step, one awkward tilt, and before you know it, a splash of coffee arcs upward like a caffeinated geyser and lands on your shirt, the floor, or if you're especially lucky, right into your shoe. This little catastrophe has played out in countless kitchens, cafes and commutes, and while it feels personal, almost like the coffee betrayed you, it's actually just physics. Specifically, it's inertia at work. Your coffee wasn't out to get you. It was just following the rules. To understand why your latte seems so determined to make a break for it, we need to go back to Newton's first law. An object in motion stays in motion. That applies not just to you, walking with your cup, but to the liquid sloshing inside it. Your body might stop. Your feet might pause. But the coffee keeps going, at least until something gets in its way, like the edge of the cup, or your nice clean hoodie. When you walk with a cup of coffee, both you and the cup are moving together at the same velocity. The liquid inside is also moving, carried along by the cup, your hand, your arm and your legs working in slightly chaotic harmony. But there's a catch. Liquids don't behave like solids. They slosh, sway, and lag behind ever so slightly. They respond to motion with a bit of a delay. When you start walking, the coffee lags. When you stop, it keeps going. This is where things get interesting. Every step you take introduces a jolt, an acceleration or a deceleration, and that causes the liquid to surge. Each jolt sends a wave through the coffee, which reflects off the walls of the cup and bounces back, often combining with the next wave. It's not just one simple motion, it's a symphony of fluid dynamics, a splashy little physics performance in a porcelain stage. Engineers and physicists refer to this as sloshing dynamics. It's a surprisingly complex field of study, especially in aerospace engineering, where the motion of liquid fuel inside a tank can affect the stability of rockets and satellites. But in your kitchen, the stakes are lower, unless you're carrying a full mug across your white carpet. The thing about sloshing is that it has a rhythm. If you walk at just the right pace, your steps can actually synchronize with the natural frequency of the coffee's wave. This is called resonance. When your footsteps match the slosh just right, each step adds to the wave, making it grow bigger and more dramatic, until, of course, gravity gives up and the coffee leaps out. It's a bit like pushing a child on a swing. If you push in rhythm, the swing gets higher and higher. The same is true for your coffee. The more in sync your motion is with the liquid's natural wave frequency, the more likely it is that the wave will build up and escape the cup. What's fascinating is that your brain isn't completely oblivious to this. Over time, we all learn little tricks to prevent coffee disasters. We slow our walk, we keep the cup lower, closer to our centre of gravity. We sometimes walk with a little backward lean, absorbing some of the motion in our elbows or shoulders. These strategies, though unscientific on the surface, are actually subtle ways of disrupting the sloshing rhythm. You're introducing variability, breaking the resonance and helping the liquid stay put. In fact, there was even a study published in the Physical Review E-journal that looked into the optimal walking strategies for carrying liquid in an open container. The researchers found that walking more slowly and holding the cup closer to your body helps reduce spill risk. They also noted that people intuitively adjust their gait to avoid spilling, often without realizing it. We are, it seems, natural-born physicists when caffeine is on the line. But inertia is not just affecting the coffee, it's affecting your whole body. Let's say you're moving forward and come to a sudden stop. Your body might halt, but your arm will tend to continue swinging forward. The cup follows, and the liquid inside is trying to go even farther. It's not misbehaving, it's just obeying Newton. The same principle applies in vehicles. When the car brakes suddenly, everything inside wants to keep going. Drinks, phones, bags, and you. This is why hot beverages and moving vehicles are such a volatile combination. If you've ever tried to take a sip of tea while in a car and ended up with a tea beard, you've met this phenomenon firsthand. To get even more precise, we can think about the concept of the centre of mass. The coffee's centre of mass is not fixed like a solid object. It shifts and flows with each motion. When the liquid's mass moves forward and upward at just the right angle, the cup's edge becomes a mere suggestion, not a barrier. Out the coffee goes. Interestingly, this is a big deal in robotics and artificial intelligence too. Teaching robots to carry liquids without spilling requires them to account for sloshing dynamics, inertia, sudden changes in acceleration, and even how to hold the cup. Human hands adjust naturally. Robots have to calculate. If you ever needed a reason to forgive yourself for an early morning spill, just remember, avoiding it means mastering complex dynamic systems. Your coffee isn't just a drink, it's a miniature physics experiment. Every step you take sends information through the cup. Waves, momentum, acceleration. You're both the scientist and the test subject, and inertia is right at the heart of it. Because while we often think of inertia in terms of cars and rockets, it's also there in every sip, every step, every drip of coffee that defies your expectations. The liquid isn't defiant, it's just honest. It doesn't know you stopped moving. It wasn't listening when you decided to pause by the table. It only knows it was in motion, and according to the laws of physics, it wants to stay that way. This behaviour is beautifully predictable once you understand it. It's the same principle that makes drinks spill during turbulence on an airplane. The plane suddenly dips or rises, and the liquid inside your cup doesn't get the memo in time. The mismatch between your frame of reference and the liquid's motion is the source of the splash. You can even see it in how drinks behave when you try to carry them while distracted. If you're focused and stable, the coffee behaves. If you're juggling your phone, keys, and an existential crisis, the odds of a spill go way up. Coordination matters. So does awareness, so does timing. In all of this, inertia reminds us that motion has memory. Not in a conscious sense, but in a physical one. The coffee doesn't forget that it was moving. It continues until something redirects it, and that redirection doesn't always happen gracefully. It happens through splashes, spills, and sometimes a damp shirt that smells faintly of hazelnut. But there's a silver lining. Every spilled drink is a quiet physics lesson. It teaches us that the universe is consistent, that forces cause change. That motion continues unless interrupted. It reminds us that even in something as ordinary as a morning beverage, the same rules apply that govern satellites, asteroids, and planetary motion. And that's kind of wonderful, because when you step back and look at it from a calmer, less coffee-stained perspective, you realise that the laws of motion aren't confined to laboratories or textbooks. They're in your cup, in your stride. in the gentle sway of liquid that just wants to keep going. All it takes is a sip, a step, and sometimes a splash to see it in action. It's a strange thing, really, how much trust we place in a few millimeters of glass and metal every time we step into a car. We buckle in, adjust the mirrors, maybe tap the steering wheel like an old friend, and off we go, zipping down the road at speeds our ancestors would have found absolutely terrifying. And for the most part, it all feels perfectly normal, comfortable even. But under that calm surface, there's a quiet collaboration going on between physics and engineering, one that works constantly to keep us safe when things go wrong. At the heart of it all is inertia. When you're driving along at 60 kilometers per hour, your car is moving and so are you. Not just your body, your organs, your blood, your coffee and the cup holder, they're all travelling at that same speed. Everything inside the vehicle is in motion, and thanks to inertia, everything wants to keep moving exactly as it is. That's fine when the road is clear and the ride is smooth. But what happens when the car suddenly stops? That's when inertia stops being polite and starts being a bit ruthless. If the car crashes into something and comes to a stop, all the stuff inside it, including you, keeps moving forward. That's not bad behaviour. It's just motion doing what motion does. Your body, still travelling at 60 kilometers per hour, continues forward until something else brings it to a halt. Ideally, that something is a seatbelt or an airbag. Less ideally, it might be the steering wheel, the dashboard, or the windshield. This is where safety engineering comes into play. Because while you can't stop inertia, you wouldn't want to, it can be managed, it can be anticipated, and over the last century, engineers have gotten very good at doing just that. Let's start with seatbelts. They are deceptively simple straps, but they're also one of the most important safety devices in a car. When you wear a seatbelt, you're literally connecting yourself to the vehicle's frame. If the car stops, the belt applies a force across your chest and hips to stop you as well. It spreads that force out over the strongest parts of your body and stretches just enough to absorb some of the energy. Instead of flying forward like a rag doll, you decelerate more gently, relatively speaking. This isn't just convenient, it's life-saving. Deceleration over a fraction of a second instead of instant impact dramatically reduces the forces your body experiences. Without a seatbelt, your body becomes a projectile, and the forces involved multiply with devastating consequences. Even at low speeds, the human body isn't built to go from moving to not moving in 0 seconds flat. Something has to cushion that change. That's inertia at work, and restraint systems keeping it in check. Airbags are the next line of defense. These devices are not soft, puffy pillows, despite what movies might suggest. They're rapidly inflating balloons made to deploy in about 30 milliseconds, faster than the blink of an eye. When a crash is detected, sensors trigger the release of a gas, usually nitrogen, that fills the airbag. The goal is to provide a soft, expanding surface that slows your motion more gradually than a dashboard would. It might sound odd to describe an exploding bag as gentle, but in physics terms, it absolutely is. It increases the time over which your body comes to a stop. And according to Newton's second law, if you increase the time over which a force is applied, the force itself is reduced. That's why airbags work. They don't stop you instantly, they stop you slower. And when it comes to crashes, slower is better. One of the most overlooked heroes of crash safety is the crumple zone. That's the part of the car, usually the front and rear, that's specifically designed to collapse. Yes, collapse. Intentionally. It sounds counterintuitive, but a car that stays rigid during a crash is actually more dangerous than one that deforms. If the entire vehicle were built like a tank, all that crash energy would transfer straight into the passengers. That's not ideal. Crumple zones solve this by giving the car room to absorb energy. When the front of a vehicle crumples in a collision, it's actually converting kinetic energy into deformation. The metal bends, folds and breaks in controlled ways, eating up energy that would otherwise go straight into the people inside. It's like giving the car a built-in buffer zone, one that sacrifices itself to save lives. To visualize this, think of catching a fast-moving ball. If you hold your hand stiff and let the ball slam into it, you'll feel the full force instantly. But if you move your hand backward as the ball arrives, you're increasing the stopping time. The ball still stops, but more gently. That's exactly what a crumple zone does, on a much more dramatic scale. All of these systems, seatbelts, airbags, crumple zones, are really just different ways of managing the same core issue: inertia. They don't stop motion from happening. They make the stop less violent. They acknowledge that when motion is suddenly interrupted, the energy has to go somewhere. And if you don't design for that, it ends up in the worst places. Even windshield glass has gotten smarter. Modern windshields are made from laminated safety glass, a sandwich of 2 sheets of glass with a layer of plastic in between. If the glass breaks, the plastic holds it together. No shards, no dangerous flying fragments. Just cracked glass, held in place. That's not magic. It's engineering built around understanding motion, force, and human fragility. Cars also have side impact beams, head restraints to prevent whiplash, energy-absorbing steering columns, and increasingly sophisticated sensor systems that can predict when a crash is about to happen. Some even tighten seat belts and adjust headrests milliseconds before impact, getting everything into optimal position before inertia throws its weight around. And speaking of weight, mass plays a huge role here too. The greater the mass of the vehicle, the more inertia it carries, and the more energy needs to be dissipated in a crash. But it's not just about how much the vehicle weighs. It's about how that weight is distributed, how the materials behave under stress, and how the structure channels force around the occupants rather than through them. This is where simulations come in. Modern safety engineers use computer models to test crashes long before a car is ever built. They simulate hundreds of collisions from every angle, tweaking designs to improve outcomes. And when the prototypes are finally ready, the crash test dummies are brought in. These dummies are highly sophisticated, packed with sensors that measure force, acceleration, and impact across every part of the body. Each crash test, whether physical or digital, is a negotiation with inertia. It's a conversation between engineering and physics. How much energy is involved? Where will it go? How can we delay the impact, spread it out, soften the blow? The answers to these questions are measured in lives saved. What's truly remarkable is how far we've come. Decades ago, cars were built for style and speed, not safety. Seatbelts weren't standard. Airbags didn't exist. The idea of a car sacrificing its own body to protect its passengers seemed almost absurd. But as our understanding of motion deepened, so did our respect for it. We stopped trying to defy physics and started working with it. That shift, from resistance to cooperation, changed everything, and it continues today. Self-driving technology, crash avoidance systems, lane assist, adaptive cruise control, all of these innovations are just the latest chapter in our ongoing dialogue with inertia. We still can't eliminate the laws of motion, but we've gotten very good at planning around them, so the next time you clip in your seatbelt or hear that soft ding reminding you to buckle up, take a quiet moment to appreciate what's really happening. You're not just following rules, you're participating in a beautifully choreographed dance between human ingenuity and the fundamental truths of motion. Because the coffee you spilled earlier and the car you're sitting in now are playing by the same rules. The difference is, one was designed to protect you from inertia. The other just wanted to stain your shirt. Imagine launching a rocket into the vast silence of space, watching it punch through the atmosphere with a deafening roar, fire blazing, metal trembling, and then nothing. The engine's cut off. The flames vanish. And yet the rocket keeps going, gliding silently, gracefully, with no visible effort, no fiery trail, and no push to keep it moving. To someone unfamiliar with physics, this might look like magic, but to anyone who's made peace with Newton's laws, it's something even better. It's inertia, finally getting a chance to shine without Earth constantly getting in the way. On Earth, motion is messy. It's a daily battle with friction, drag, gravity, and the occasional obstacle like a wall or a tree. But space is different. It's quiet, empty, vast. There's no air to push against you, no wind to slow you down, no road for your tyres to grip. It's the perfect stage for Newton's first law to perform in its purest form. Inertia, that lovely tendency of an object to keep doing whatever it's already doing, becomes beautifully obvious up there. If a spacecraft is moving through space at 28,000 kilometers per hour, it will keep moving at exactly that speed and in exactly that direction, unless something gives it a reason not to. No engine needed, no booster packs, just momentum and a vast emptiness that politely refuses to interfere. That's why rockets only need fuel for a short burst at the beginning of their journey. The energy from the engines gets the craft moving, overcoming Earth's gravity and punching through the drag of our atmosphere. But once they're out in space, where resistance is practically non-existent, the engines can take a break. The rocket just coasts effortlessly, like a kid who got a really good push on a swing and now doesn't need another one for a while. It's a beautiful paradox. In space, you burn fuel not to stay in motion, but to change your motion. You use thrust to speed up, slow down, or turn. But if you don't need to change directional speed, you don't need to burn anything. You're already moving, and inertia's got your back. This is also why astronauts appear to float aboard the International Space Station. It's a common misconception that there's no gravity up there. In reality, the station is still well within Earth's gravitational pull, about 90% as strong as it is on the surface. The difference is that the station, and everything inside it, is in a continuous state of free fall. Picture this. If you jump off a building, please don't, you fall toward the ground, accelerating due to gravity. Now imagine doing that horizontally at such a high speed that as you fall, the Earth curves away beneath you at the same rate. You never hit the ground because the ground is always falling away too. That's orbit. That's what the space station is doing. Falling around the Earth, not down to it. And because the astronauts inside are falling at the same rate, they appear to float. They're weightless, not because gravity disappeared, but because they're in constant freefall. It's a bit like being inside an elevator with the cables cut. If the elevator were moving sideways at 28,000 kilometers per hour and somehow circling the Earth forever. Not the most relaxing elevator ride, perhaps, but an accurate analogy for orbital physics. Inertia plays a huge role in this dance. The station wants to keep moving in a straight line. Gravity wants to pull it down. The result is a curved path, a delicate compromise between flying off into space and falling back to Earth. This balance is so perfect that the station can orbit the planet once every 90 minutes, experiencing 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets in a single Earth day, all thanks to motion and mass and the absence of meddling forces. And when it's time to come home, things get spicy. The spacecraft can't just turn off its motion like a light switch. It has to work against inertia. Engineers fire retro rockets, thrusters pointed opposite to the direction of travel, to slow the spacecraft down. Once it loses enough speed, gravity does the rest, pulling it down toward the atmosphere where drag finally shows up to join the party. Re-entry becomes a wrestling match between inertia and atmospheric resistance. The spacecraft heats up, slows down, and eventually lands, because enough external forces finally acted to break the spell of motion. Even maneuvering in space requires a rethinking of how movement works. On Earth, turning your car involves friction between the tyres and the road, but in orbit there's no surface to push against. To change orientation, spacecraft use reaction control systems, small bursts of gas expelled in the opposite direction of the desired spin. This works thanks to Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But underlying all of it is inertia, allowing the vehicle to keep spinning until another force comes along to stop it. Astronauts themselves also deal with inertia in ways that feel both futuristic and clumsy. Imagine trying to turn a wrench in microgravity. You apply a twist, and suddenly you're spinning too. That's conservation of angular momentum. If you don't brace yourself, every force you apply to an object pushes back on you. Moving from one end of the space station to the other isn't like walking. It's more like swimming through invisible syrup, using handrails to guide your body so you don't float into a wall. Everything that moves stays moving unless something stops it, including people. Even small tools become potential hazards. A floating screwdriver doesn't stay put because you let go of it. It drifts, slowly, calmly, until it bumps into something or someone. This is why organisation and precision are crucial aboard spacecraft. The laws of motion are always in play, and they're not interested in excuses. One of the most famous demonstrations of inertia in space came from astronaut Don Pettit, who conducted a series of informal science experiments aboard the International Space Station. In one, he spun a CD with a drop of water on it, showing how both the disk and the water behaved in microgravity. The water didn't drip or fall, it clung, stretched, and danced with the spinning surface, beautifully illustrating the predictability of motion in a near-perfect vacuum. In many ways, space is Newton's happy place. It's where his laws are free to act without interference. There's no air to complicate things, no hills or friction to ruin the math. Just mass, force, and motion, all playing together on a cosmic scale. It's why so many physics textbooks feature examples from spaceflight. It's the cleanest, clearest place to see how the universe works. And it's not just satellites and space stations. The planets themselves are coasting through space, held in their paths by gravity and their own inertia. The Earth spins, the Moon orbits, comets race through the solar system in long, lazy loops. All of it governed by simple, elegant rules. Objects in motion remain in motion unless acted upon by a force, and in the vast quiet of space, there just aren't that many forces around to interfere, so the rocket that didn't need fuel, at least not after the launch, becomes a symbol of how motion behaves when nothing stands in its way. It's not an exception to the rules, it is the rule in its purest form. A reminder that sometimes all you need to do is start moving. The universe will take it from there. At first glance, orbits seem like magic. Planets spinning endlessly around stars, moons gliding smoothly around planets, satellites tracing invisible loops above our heads, all without strings, motors, or anyone at the controls. It's easy to look up at the night sky, spot the moon, and wonder, why doesn't it fall down? The truth is, it is falling. Constantly. And that's the secret to understanding orbits. They're not about avoiding gravity. They're about dancing with it, perfectly balanced between falling and moving forward, in a never-ending game of cosmic keep-away. To get a sense of how this works, imagine standing on a mountaintop and firing a cannon horizontally. If you fire a small shot, it travels a short distance before gravity pulls it to the ground. Fire harder, and it goes farther before hitting the ground. Now imagine firing it with such incredible speed that, as it falls, the Earth's surface curves away beneath it at exactly the same rate. The cannonball never hits the ground, it just keeps falling around the Earth. That's an orbit. Replace the cannonball with a satellite or a space station, and you've got a real-world version of this elegant idea. This concept was beautifully illustrated by Sir Isaac Newton himself, who imagined just such a scenario, firing a cannon from a mountaintop fast enough that it circled the Earth. And while we don't actually launch things from mountain cannons these days, the principle remains the same. Orbital motion is about momentum and gravity working together, each tugging at the rules of the universe without quite winning. Momentum keeps the object moving forward. Gravity pulls it inward. The result is a curved path, neither a straight line nor a direct fall, but something in between. This constant compromise gives us the smooth loops we call orbits. And here's where things get wonderfully relaxing. Once you're in a stable orbit, there's no need to fire engines or burn fuel just to stay there. As long as no significant force interferes, an orbit can go on indefinitely. The object coasts through space, always moving forward, always being pulled inward, but never quite reaching the surface. It's inertia and gravity in perfect conversation. Earth's gravity is strong, but not inescapable. At about 8 kilometers per second, or just under 30,000 kilometers per hour, a spacecraft can achieve what's called low Earth orbit. At that speed, the forward momentum matches the pull of gravity, and the spacecraft enters a stable loop around the planet. If it goes even faster, it can reach higher orbits, eventually escaping Earth's gravity entirely and heading toward the Moon, Mars, or the outer reaches of the solar system. This balance is also why astronauts feel weightless. They're not beyond gravity, they're deep within its influence. But because they're in free fall along with their spacecraft, they experience a kind of graceful suspension. Everything inside the orbiting craft is falling together, and without a surface to stop that fall, the sensation is one of floating. But orbits come in many shapes and sizes. The most famous are circular orbits, where the distance from the central body remains constant. But many orbits are elliptical, like flattened circles. Comets, for example, follow elongated paths that bring them close to the Sun, and then send them swinging back into the outer darkness for decades or even centuries. These elongated orbits are governed by the same principles: momentum and gravity pulling and gliding in rhythmic cycles that span generations. The Moon's orbit around Earth is a gentle example of this balance. It's constantly being pulled toward Earth by gravity, yet its sideways motion keeps it from crashing down. Instead, it floats along its curved path, always falling, never landing. It's this delicate dynamic that gives us tides, eclipses, and romantic walks beneath a glowing orb that quietly reminds us of the laws that hold the universe together. The same principles apply to the planets orbiting the Sun. Earth, for instance, doesn't stay near the Sun because it's being pulled like a magnet. It stays near because it's moving forward fast enough that the Sun's gravity bends its path into a loop. Take away the Sun, and Earth would drift off in a straight line, cold and lost. Increase Earth's speed dramatically, and it would escape the Sun's pull and fly away forever. It's all about balance, an eternal tug-of-war with no winners, just motion. Even satellites launched from Earth obey these rules. Whether it's a weather satellite taking snapshots of hurricanes or a GPS satellite helping someone find the nearest coffee shop, each one stays in orbit by moving fast enough to fall around the Earth rather than into it. Engineers calculate exact speeds and altitudes to achieve this balance, using Newton's laws to place these marvels in just the right spot. There's a term for the speed needed to stay in a stable orbit at a given altitude: orbital velocity. It changes depending on how far you are from the planet's centre. Closer to Earth, you have to move faster to keep from falling. Farther away, the pull of gravity is weaker, so you don't need to be in such a rush. That's why geostationary satellites, which appear fixed in the sky from our perspective, are positioned much higher up, orbiting once every 24 hours in sync with Earth's rotation. And if you want to leave orbit entirely, you'll need to reach escape velocity, the speed required to break free from a planet's gravitational pull. For Earth, that's about 11.2 kilometers per second. It's a steep ask, but once you reach it, you're no longer bound to Earth. You're on your way into interplanetary space, still governed by gravity, but no longer trapped. Even though orbits feel stable and eternal, they're not immune to change. The Moon, for example, is slowly drifting away from Earth, about 4 centimeters each year, thanks to tidal forces. Over millions of years, this will subtly alter our relationship with the Moon, changing everything from eclipse patterns to the length of Earth's days. Even the most graceful dances evolve over time. Human-made satellites also deal with orbital decay, especially those in lower orbits. Tiny amounts of atmospheric drag, even in space, gradually pull them down. Without occasional adjustments, these satellites eventually re-enter Earth's atmosphere and burn up. Engineers design orbits carefully, balancing longevity, purpose, and the ever-present pull of gravity. There's something deeply calming about all of this. The fact that motion and gravity can come together to create such quiet, orderly paths through the chaos of space. That planets can glide for billions of years along invisible lines. That even in the vastness of the cosmos, rules exist, and they work. It's like the universe itself is a patient choreographer, setting everything in motion and letting the dance unfold. And all of it, every moonrise, every solar eclipse, every satellite that whispers data across the sky, comes back to the simple idea that an object in motion stays in motion, and that gravity doesn't have to crash things together. Sometimes it just keeps them company as they fall together, forever missing each other. That's an orbit. Not a circle drawn in space, but a relationship. A balance between wanting to move straight and being gently pulled inward. A quiet compromise that holds galaxies together, that lets moons spin in harmony, and that fills our night sky with motion we barely notice, but which never, ever stops. There's something serene about looking up at the night sky and knowing that every glowing dot, every streak of light, every orbiting moon is not just drifting aimlessly, it's following a rule book as old as the universe itself. It may not seem like it at first glance, but space is surprisingly well behaved. All those cosmic bodies, moons, meteors, asteroids, comets, are not floating around at random. They are dancing to the tune of inertia. Inertia, that quiet, stubborn principle, is a cosmic traffic manager. It doesn't shout, it doesn't steer. It simply ensures that everything keeps doing what it's doing unless something interferes. And when it comes to celestial objects, it's interference that's the exception, not the rule. Let's start with moons. Take Earth's moon, for example. It doesn't just hang there. It's not tethered by a cord or hovering by some mysterious force. It's constantly falling toward Earth, pulled by gravity. But it's also moving forward fast enough that it keeps missing. That's orbital motion in a nutshell. The moon's inertia tries to carry it in a straight line, while Earth's gravity keeps tugging it inward. The result is a graceful elliptical loop that's been going on for billions of years. And it's not just our moon. Jupiter, with its dozens of moons, hosts some of the most fascinating orbital systems in the solar system. Ganymede, Europa, and Io, among others, all follow precise paths shaped by inertia and gravity. They don't spiral in, they don't drift away, at least not quickly. They're held in a careful balance, each one falling around Jupiter rather than into it, their momentum perfectly tuned to their distance from the planet. The idea of moons spiralling into their host planets might sound dramatic, and in a few distant cases it does happen, slowly. Tidal forces, the gravitational tugs between planet and moon, can transfer energy in such a way that a moon's orbit changes over time. Some moons, like Mars' Phobos, are actually getting closer to their planet with each passing century, and are expected to crash or break apart eventually. But these processes take millions of years. In the short term, inertia wins and the moons stay aloft. Now shift your gaze a little further out to the asteroid belt, a massive region between Mars and Jupiter filled with rocky remnants from the early solar system. These asteroids, ranging in size from pebbles to dwarf planets, are all in motion, orbiting the Sun on paths dictated by inertia and gravity. Each one is doing its own version of that forward-falling dance. Some orbits are neat and circular, others stretched into elongated ellipses, but none of them are standing still. The asteroid belt exists in part because of Jupiter's immense gravity. The gas giant's presence prevented the formation of a planet in that region by constantly tugging on the building blocks. But once those asteroids found their stable orbits, inertia kept them moving. They don't need a push. They don't need permission. Their motion is conserved, predictable, and surprisingly poetic. Of course, not everything in space is so neatly arranged. Comets take a more dramatic approach. Most comets live in the outer reaches of the solar system, in distant regions like the Kuiper Belt or the Oort cloud. Occasionally one gets nudged by a passing star, a gravitational interaction, or the gentle chaos of deep space, and begins a long, looping journey toward the Sun. These orbits can take hundreds, even thousands of years to complete. Halley's Comet, for example, swings by Earth every 76 years, returning like a cosmic visitor who knows how to keep an appointment. As a comet approaches the Sun, the increased heat causes it to shed gas and dust, forming the iconic glowing tail that always points away from the Sun, thanks to the solar wind. But even here, Inertia is in control. The comet doesn't slow down just because it's getting close. It speeds up, whips around the sun, and then drifts back out into the cold, dark reaches of space, its momentum carrying it until gravity pulls it around again. Sometimes a comet's path can be altered by gravitational encounters, especially with large planets. These gravitational assists or slingshots can change a comet's orbit dramatically, speeding it up, redirecting it, or even capturing it. But unless something interrupts it, the motion continues. Inertia, once again, doesn't play favourites. It simply keeps everything moving. Then there are meteoroids, tiny bits of rock and metal that drift through space until they meet an atmosphere. Once they hit Earth's air, we call them meteors. If they survive the trip to the ground, they become meteorites. But before all that drama, they're just objects obeying Newton's laws. If one happens to intersect with Earth's orbit, the collision is sudden, bright, and sometimes noisy, but entirely predictable. Their trajectories are straight lines through space, only altered when a planet, moon, or star steps in with gravity's firm hand. This brings us to a beautiful truth about inertia in space. Most collisions are not due to chaos, but to precise alignment. The cosmos is vast, and most things miss each other. A comet doesn't hit Earth because it's headed our way. It hits because its path perfectly intersects with ours at exactly the same moment. It's like throwing darts from across a stadium and hitting the same point on a spinning globe. It doesn't happen often, and when it does, it's because inertia guided both paths to the same spot. Even when things do collide, planets with asteroids, moons with debris, stars with other stars, it's inertia that determines the outcome. The speed, angle, and mass of each object shape the impact. Some collisions shatter, others merge, some fling material into new orbits. It's a cosmic billiards game, with Newton chalking the cue. Perhaps one of the most beautiful examples of inertia in space is the Voyager probes. Launched in the late 1970s, they were sent on missions to explore the outer planets. Once their work was done, they kept going. No engines, no corrections, just coasting through space forever. Voyager 1 is now over 24 billion kilometers from Earth, still moving outward on a path set decades ago, still sending faint signals back home. It doesn't need more fuel. Its inertia carries it on, untouched by anything but the faintest pull of distant stars. It's a reminder that in space, once you begin a journey, you don't need to keep pressing forward. You just need to avoid interference. The motion carries you, steadily, quietly, patiently. Every moon, every asteroid, every forgotten rock in the void is a testament to this rule. They drift not because they're aimless, but because they're obedient to a deeper law. And here's the lovely irony. While space often looks still and silent from afar, it's actually filled with movement. Not frantic, chaotic movement, but steady motion in every direction. Stars orbit the center of galaxies. Galaxies move through the cosmic web. Clusters drift. Superclusters stretch. Everything is in motion, and inertia is what keeps it going. It's humbling, really. We think of falling as something that ends in a crash. But in space, falling can be eternal. It can be beautiful. It can be safe. Moons fall around planets. Comets fall around stars. Meteors fall toward atmospheres. And inertia, ever patient, ever faithful, makes sure that unless something stops them, they'll keep falling, keep orbiting, keep moving, through darkness, through light, through the endless rhythm of the cosmos. Inertia isn't just a story told by objects in space, or coffee cups on the move. It exists in places where you might not expect it, in cells, in genes, in the way life itself unfolds. Biology, for all its wild diversity and constant change, also clings stubbornly to what already works. In many ways, evolution has its own kind of inertia, not in the mechanical sense, but in the way living systems resist unnecessary change and prefer sticking with what's proven effective. Imagine evolution as a slow-moving river. It twists, turns, and occasionally floods, but most of the time it follows the path of least resistance. When a trait works well, say feathers for insulation or lungs for breathing air, it tends to stay. Not because life is lazy, but because changing it would require effort, mutation, and a little luck. If something isn't broken, evolution rarely bothers to fix it. This is why sharks, crocodiles, and horseshoe crabs look so eerily similar to their ancient ancestors. They've been cruising through evolutionary time like biological time capsules, their basic forms unchanged for tens or even hundreds of millions of years. Their bodies work. Their ecosystems accept them. The pressures to change just haven't outweighed the success of staying the same. That's evolutionary inertia, the tendency of life to keep going in the same direction, until something powerful nudges it off course. It's easy to think of evolution as this relentless engine of innovation, constantly churning out new designs, and to some degree it is. But innovation in biology is expensive. Most mutations do nothing. Many are harmful, very few are genuinely beneficial, and even those can be limited by the biology that came before. You can't just slap wings on a fish and expect it to fly. Life builds on what already exists, one step at a time, and each step has to work before the next one can be taken. That's why there are no square-shaped animals or living beings with wheels, not because those things wouldn't be cool, but because they're almost impossible to develop incrementally from the body plans we already have. Evolution doesn't get to start from scratch. It has to work with the messy, bony, slightly squishy materials already available. A brilliant example of this is the giraffe's neck. You'd think a neck that long would need extra bones to make it work. But giraffes, like almost all mammals, have exactly 7 cervical vertebrae. The same number of neck bones you have. Each vertebra is just massively elongated. Why didn't evolution just add a few more bones? Because in mammals, the number of neck vertebrae is incredibly conserved. Changing it would require altering the developmental processes in early embryos, a risk evolution rarely takes unless the payoff is enormous. This kind of biological resistance to structural changes everywhere. Vertebrate limbs, for instance, are variations on a theme. Whether it's a human arm, a bat's wing, or a whale's flipper, the underlying bones are almost the same. One long bone, 2 shorter ones, a group of wrist bones and digits. Evolution didn't reinvent the wheel for each species. It just remodeled what was already there. The same goes for genetic systems. DNA is remarkably consistent across all known life. The genetic code, the way sequences of bases translate into proteins, is virtually universal, from bacteria to blue whales. You might expect that life could have evolved different codes for different environments, but once the system worked, it stuck. Changing it would mean breaking the entire machinery of life. Enzymes, ribosomes, replication processes, all of it. That kind of overhaul is evolutionarily expensive and unnecessary when the existing system runs smoothly. Even at the level of ecosystems, inertia is everywhere. Coral reefs, rainforests and grasslands tend to maintain their species compositions, nutrient flows and energy cycles unless something dramatic disturbs them. It's not that ecosystems can't change. They do, especially in response to climate shifts, human interference or geological events. But left alone, they tend to reach a state of dynamic stability. Species interact in predictable ways. Predators and prey balance each other. Plants and pollinators fall into rhythm. This kind of balance doesn't mean nothing changes. It just means the changes are usually small and slow, with feedback mechanisms that keep the system in check. Remove too many wolves, and deer populations spike. But then the vegetation declines, the deer suffer, and eventually the system nudges back toward equilibrium. These checks and balances are part of what makes ecosystems resilient, until a tipping point is reached. And once you cross that point, inertia can work in reverse. A collapsing ecosystem can be just as resistant to recovery as a healthy one is to collapse. Inertia in evolution also explains why certain traits linger long after they've lost their original function. Think of the human appendix. Once part of a larger digestive system used for processing tough plant matter, it now mostly just hangs out, occasionally flaring up for no reason. Or take wisdom teeth, which often overcrowd our modern jaws, or goosebumps, little muscular reactions that once fluffed up our ancestors' fur for warmth or intimidation, now mostly useless on smooth human skin. These relics are evolutionary leftovers. They haven't been strongly selected against, so they persist. Evolution is less about perfection and more about good enough. If a trait doesn't cause enough harm to get weeded out, it may stick around simply because replacing it is more trouble than it's worth. Even behaviours show signs of evolutionary inertia. Birds building nests, wolves hunting in packs, and humans forming social bonds. These are all complex actions shaped by generations of selective pressure, and once those behaviours become embedded in a species' way of life, they don't change easily. New challenges might arise, but instincts don't vanish overnight. Adaptation takes time, and life often leans on familiar strategies while it figures things out. In some ways, this biological inertia is comforting. It means that life, once it finds something that works, tends to preserve it. The forms we see around us, the eyes, the wings, the trees, the fins, have survived not because they're perfect, but because they're functional, reliable, and remarkably adaptable. The more stable the environment, the more life leans into those old designs. But when the environment shifts quickly, like in the case of climate change, pollution, or habitat destruction, evolution's usual pace becomes a liability. The same inertia that protected life through ice ages and asteroid impacts can now leave species vulnerable. They're not equipped to shift gears in just a few decades. It takes generations, and time is not always a luxury biology can afford. That's where human activity becomes part of the story. We've become a force of change far faster than evolution can keep up with. Entire ecosystems are being reshaped in mere years. Species face pressures they've never encountered before. Chemicals, urban noise, artificial lights, plastics, and rising temperatures. The inertia of life is powerful, but even it has limits, and yet life tries. Some species are adapting. Moths are changing colours to match urban soot. Birds are adjusting migration patterns. Fish are altering their breeding cycles. Evolution may be slow, but it's not stagnant. When pushed hard enough, life responds. The river of biology might twist slowly, but with enough force, even rivers change their course. There's something humbling about knowing that our bodies, our instincts, and our ecosystems are all products of inertia. We carry with us the legacy of ancient fish, primates, and bacteria, lineages that resisted change not because they were stuck, but because they were successful. Evolution, like physics, is deeply tied to the past. It conserves what works, it nudges gently, and only when absolutely necessary does it leap. So the next time you yawn, stretch, or shiver in the cold, remember that you're doing something very old. Something that worked well enough to stick around. In that moment, you're part of the long, quiet motion of life itself, an unbroken chain of form and function, coasting through time on the gentle momentum of what came before. There's a certain comfort in a familiar's morning routine. The alarm goes off, you hit snooze once or twice, maybe 3 times if the bed is particularly persuasive, and then you shuffle into the kitchen, make your usual drink and glance at your phone or the morning light or a cat demanding breakfast. It all unfolds with a kind of rhythm, a smooth continuity that asks nothing more of you than to keep doing what you've always done. That gentle pull of the familiar isn't laziness, it's mental inertia. Much like how a moving object wants to stay in motion, our thoughts, habits, and patterns want to keep flowing in the same direction. If you've ever struggled to start a new habit or break an old one, you've met this mental inertia face to face. And while it can feel frustrating, it's also a completely natural part of how the brain works. At the heart of this is the brain's desire to conserve energy. The human brain is a marvel of biological engineering, but it's also a bit of an energy hog. It accounts for just about 2% of your body's mass, but it uses roughly 20% of your resting energy. That's a lot of power for a relatively small organ, and so, understandably, the brain looks for shortcuts, ways to do more with less. One of those shortcuts is building habits. When you repeat an action often enough, the brain starts to automate it. Neural pathways strengthen with repetition, forming grooves of behavior that are easy to slip into. This frees up mental energy for other tasks like problem solving, creativity, or wondering what that pigeon is doing on your windowsill again. From a biological standpoint, this is brilliant. Why spend time and effort analysing how to brush your teeth or tie your shoes every morning? Just press play on the mental cassette, and off you go. Habits streamline your day, reduce decision fatigue, and offer a sense of control and predictability in a world that often feels chaotic. But the flip side is that habits, once formed, don't like to be moved. That's where the mental equivalent of Newton's first law kicks in. A mind at rest, doing the same thing it's always done, tends to stay at rest. A pattern in motion, whether it's checking your phone first thing in the morning or reaching for a snack when you're bored, tends to stay in motion. Changing direction takes effort, and often more effort than we anticipate. This is why New Year's resolutions tend to fade by February. We make grand plans, wake up earlier, eat healthier, exercise more, finally learn to play the ukulele. And for a few days, we ride that initial burst of motivation. But then inertia takes hold. Not the kind that propels us forward, but the kind that tugs us gently but persistently back into familiar grooves. Procrastination is another expression of mental inertia. It's not always about laziness or avoidance, it's often about momentum. Starting something new, especially if it feels big or uncertain, requires us to overcome the psychological equivalent of static friction. We have to summon extra mental force just to get rolling, and until we do, we remain still, orbiting the task without quite touching it. Interestingly, research in cognitive psychology supports this idea. The Zeigarnik effect, for instance, describes how our brains remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones. The mental tension of not starting something can gnaw at us, creating a kind of pressure build-up. But once we begin, even just a little, the inertia often shifts in our favour. Progress, no matter how small, has a way of encouraging more progress. This is why so many productivity strategies focus on simply starting. Set a timer for 5 minutes, open the document, put on your shoes. The goal isn't to finish, it's to create movement. Because once the mental wheels are turning, it's easier to keep going than it was to start in the first place. Of course, not all routines are bad. Many are incredibly useful. They provide structure, reduce anxiety, and help us function efficiently. But the challenge arises when a routine no longer serves us, or worse, holds us back, and yet still feels easier to follow than to change. That's the paradox of mental inertia. Even when we want to change, the brain prefers familiarity. This isn't just about individual habits either. Entire belief systems can be shaped by mental inertia. Once we adopt a worldview or an interpretation of events, it becomes the default lens through which we process information. New ideas that contradict our existing framework don't just feel unfamiliar, they feel like friction. They challenge the mental flow we've grown accustomed to. That's why changing your mind about something important can feel so difficult. It's not just about logic or evidence. It's about rerouting established neural pathways, stepping off the mental treadmill, and building something new from scratch. And that takes more than information. It takes reflection, openness, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. But it's not all resistance and struggle. There's something soothing about the fact that our mind seeks stability, that we form routines, rituals and rhythms not out of weakness, but out of a deep drive for balance. It's what allows us to function in a complex world. It's what makes getting through the day possible. The trick is learning how to work with this inertia rather than against it. One gentle strategy is the habit stack, pairing a new behavior with an existing one. Want to start meditating? Attach it to your morning coffee, already brushing your teeth twice a day, add 2 minutes of balance practice right after. The brain loves continuity, and linking new actions to familiar anchors can create smoother transitions. Another is to lower the activation energy. If going to the gym feels overwhelming, start by just putting on your workout clothes. If writing a report seems monumental, commit to writing a single sentence. These small steps reduce the mental friction, making it easier to break the stillness and build momentum. And when you do find yourself slipping back into old patterns, it helps to remember that inertia works both ways. Just as it's hard to start something new, it's also hard to stop something that's already in motion. Change takes time, repetition, and a little kindness. Habits aren't broken in a day, they're redirected over many days. There's also value in reframing mental inertia as a feature, not a flaw. It's a sign that your brain is doing its job, conserving energy, streamlining behavior, protecting you from the exhaustion of endless decision-making. It's not trying to sabotage you, it's just trying to keep you afloat. The challenge is to steer that helpful instinct in a direction that aligns with what you actually want. Even creativity follows a kind of inertia. Writers often speak of flow, that magical state where words spill out effortlessly. But getting into that state can feel like pushing a stubborn boulder up a hill. The first few sentences are clunky, the idea's awkward. Then, slowly, the rhythm emerges. The thoughts begin to connect. And before long, you're in motion. Life is full of these moments where mental effort transforms into ease, where starting is the hardest part, but continuation feels natural. It's a testament to how powerful momentum can be, and how, once harnessed, inertia isn't something that holds us back, it's something that carries us forward. So if you've been meaning to start something, change something, fix something, learn something, know that the first push is the hardest. The resistance you feel isn't a sign of weakness, it's the natural cost of changing direction. But once you do begin, even in the smallest way, you're engaging a powerful force that, once set in motion, tends to stay in motion. And in that, there's hope. Because just as our minds cling to the familiar, they also have the extraordinary ability to adapt, grow, and shift course. We are creatures of habit, yes, but also of potential. And with a little momentum, even the most stubborn patterns can begin to move. Sometimes it feels like the world is a giant machine made of clockwork parts, ticking, grinding, and groaning forward in the same direction year after year. Political structures, economic systems, laws, traditions, they all move with a kind of heavy momentum. And trying to change even a small piece of that machine can feel like nudging a glacier with a teaspoon. But that slowness isn't always failure, it's often inertia. And just like the laws of motion that govern falling apples and orbiting moons, there are invisible forces shaping the way societies behave. Forces that make it difficult to change course, but also help things stay coherent, stable, and reliable. Institutional inertia, economic momentum, and the persistence of cultural patterns aren't flaws in the system. They're features of how large human groups operate over time. Take institutions, governments, schools, legal systems, healthcare networks. These are not just buildings and officials, they're webs of policies, expectations, behaviours, and historical decisions layered on top of one another like geological strata. Each layer reinforces the next. Rules build on older rules. Processes evolve slowly because every shift must be justified, debated, documented, and tested. In many cases this is deliberate. Stability is prioritized over speed. That doesn't mean institutions are incapable of change. They do change, often dramatically, but rarely overnight. Reforms take time, usually years or decades, because they must travel through channels designed to filter out rash decisions. And while that can be maddening in times of crisis, it also helps prevent chaos. If every gust of opinion could reshape the law or rewrite a constitution, The result might be more instability than innovation. Economies work the same way. Currency systems, markets, trade relationships, supply chains. These are massive, interconnected structures that don't pivot easily. A policy that works well on paper might take years to implement and even longer to show results. And when disruption does come, like a financial crash or a pandemic, the shockwaves ripple slowly, revealing just how interconnected and sluggish those systems truly are. It's not just about bureaucracy, it's about scale. When something involves millions, or even billions of people, even small changes become complicated. Imagine trying to turn a ship the size of a continent. You can't yank the wheel. You steer gradually, checking that each adjustment holds, that nothing breaks under pressure, and that the direction is sustainable. Cultural inertia is another layer entirely. Language, values, customs, and beliefs pass from generation to generation like heirlooms. These are not easily rewritten. People don't adopt new ideas just because they're told to. Beliefs are shaped by experience, community, memory, and identity. The deeper they're rooted, the more effort it takes to shift them. Yet, they do shift. Think of how societies have evolved on issues like civil rights, gender equality, and access to education. None of these changes happened quickly. They moved slowly, facing resistance at every turn. But over time, ideas that once seemed radical became mainstream. Laws followed culture, or in some cases, led it. Movements grew from whispers to songs to crowds in the streets. That's the other side of inertia. Once something does begin to move, it carries momentum of its own. Institutional resistance may be strong, but it's not invincible. It cracks under pressure, under persistence, under the steady weight of people refusing to give up. Social movements often begin quietly. One person speaking up, one group organizing, one story told at the right moment. And then, like objects in motion, they gather speed. The story spreads, the voices multiply, and what once seemed immovable begins to shift, almost imperceptibly at first and then all at once. History is full of these turning points: the abolition of slavery, universal suffrage, public health campaigns, environmental awareness. None of them came from a single, decisive moment. They were long, winding processes of resistance, persuasion, protest, failure, and eventually progress. They were built on the shoulders of people who pushed when it was easier to be still. And they remind us that inertia, while powerful, is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. Of course, societal momentum isn't always moving in the right direction. Systems can carry harmful patterns forward for centuries. Inequality, discrimination, corruption. These are not new problems. They're old patterns reinforced by habit, economics, fear, and convenience. But even here, change is possible. Hard, yes. Slow, always, but possible. The trick is understanding that resistance to change is not always opposition. It can be hesitation, confusion, fear of uncertainty. Institutions aren't monoliths, they're made of people, and people, like atoms in a solid, tend to stay in place unless stirred. That stirring takes effort. It takes ideas, leadership, empathy, and time, but once it starts, it spreads. A single grain of sand can trigger a landslide given the right slope. This is why storytelling matters so much in social change. Narratives are how ideas sneak past defences. They make the abstract personal. They take statistics and turn them into faces, families, futures. And once a story enters the public consciousness, it has a way of sticking, quietly shifting the weight of what people expect, what they tolerate, and what they demand. Education plays a similar role. It doesn't just transfer knowledge, it opens doors to new frameworks, new questions, new critiques of the status quo. It helps people imagine alternatives, and imagination is the first step toward movement. It's also important to recognise that not all change needs to be revolutionary. Some of the most enduring shifts are gradual, tweaks to policy, updates to curricula, adjustments in tone, a change in wording, a new standard, a more inclusive design. These things may not make headlines, but they accumulate. They move society inch by inch towards something better. And sometimes staying still is the problem. When a society faces climate change, rising inequality, or failing institutions, inertia becomes a threat. The inability to act becomes its own kind of risk. In those moments, momentum must be built deliberately, not just by governments, but by communities, businesses, scientists, artists, and everyday people making small choices that ripple outward. There's comfort in knowing that progress doesn't require perfection. It just requires pressure. Consistent, compassionate, persistent pressure. It requires remembering that inertia is not apathy, it's mass. And mass moves when enough force is applied in the right direction. So if the world feels slow to change, or even stuck, remember this. Things are always moving, even when you can't see it. The conversations happening today might become the policies of tomorrow. The protest signs of this decade might become the textbooks of the next. The quiet work of organising, writing, teaching, listening. It all matters. It all accumulates. And once change begins, it carries with it a force of its own. A social momentum, a cultural coasting. A path reshaped not by one dramatic push, but by thousands of tiny nudges. We often underestimate just how powerful slow, steady effort can be. But if physics has taught us anything, it's that inertia is not the enemy. It's the context. It's the environment in which all change happens. And like any law of motion, it can be understood, anticipated, and worked with. So even in the face of massive systems and tangled histories, hope isn't naive. It's physics. It's knowing that when enough people pull in the same direction, even the biggest structures eventually turn. Maybe not quickly, maybe not easily, but always, eventually. Sometimes all it takes is a tiny push, a slight nudge, a single spark in a quiet room. But other times, especially when inertia has been building for years, it takes something much bigger, a force strong enough to shift the status quo. A decision so deliberate it doesn't just start a new motion, it stops an old one. In physics, we call this a net force. It's the total unbalanced force acting on an object, the sum of all pushes and pulls that don't cancel each other out. And when that force is not zero, when something tips the scales, that's when things begin to change. It's what launches rockets, turns tides, and starts revolutions. It's also what gets you out of bed on the mornings when your blanket has declared itself sovereign. Net forces everywhere, not just in motion, but in motivation. Let's start with the literal. Imagine a spacecraft sitting silently on a launch pad. It's massive, heavier than a blue whale in a library, and for now, it's still. Gravity pulls it down with unwavering commitment. But inside the rocket are tanks of fuel, pumps, chambers, valves, all engineered to produce one thing, enough thrust to overcome that downward pull. That's the net force. The engines fire, and for a moment, the rocket shakes but doesn't move. The forces are still balanced. Gravity says, "Not yet." Then, suddenly, the thrust exceeds the weight. The net force becomes positive, and the rocket begins to rise. Slowly at first, then with growing speed, it escapes the clutches of inertia. Not because someone wanted it to, but because enough force was applied in the right direction, and for long enough. In our daily lives, change works much the same way. You can have the desire to change, the awareness, even the tools. But unless the sum of your efforts outweighs the resistance, your habits, fears, routines, doubts, nothing budges. You stay where you are, not because you're incapable, but because your internal and external forces are still balancing each other out. To break that balance, you need a net force. Sometimes it's a burst of motivation, sometimes it's a deadline, sometimes it's a moment of clarity at 2 a.m, usually accompanied by snacks and a sudden desire to reevaluate your entire existence. Whatever form it takes, once it tips the equation in favour of action, change becomes possible. The same logic applies to much bigger systems. Societies, for instance, don't shift because one person raises their hand. They shift when enough people apply force, collective pressure, voices, votes, art, protest, policy. And when that pressure overcomes the weight of tradition, inertia, and established power. Change begins not just when someone speaks, but when the cumulative push becomes unignorable. Think of the civil rights movement. It didn't succeed because one individual stood alone. It succeeded because millions of people over years and decades applied sustained force. Through marches, legal challenges, media campaigns, boycotts, songs and speeches, they generated a net force powerful enough to shake the foundation of unjust systems. Or look at the environmental movement. For a long time, warnings about pollution and climate change were background noise. But over time, the evidence mounted. Scientists spoke louder. Young people began organizing. Businesses adapted. Policies changed. The net force grew. Slowly, the needle began to move. Of course, not every force needs to be explosive. In many cases, change begins with a whisper. A single idea, shared quietly, that grows legs and finds its way into conversations, classrooms, films, memes, and policy. Cultural shifts don't always need drama. Sometimes they need persistence. Force doesn't have to be violent. It can be patient, strategic, even gentle, but it has to be enough. In relationships, this principle explains why change can be so difficult. People often say they'll change when they're ready, and that's partly true. But readiness alone isn't enough. There has to be a reason to shift, a strong enough emotional or practical force that outweighs the comfort of familiarity. That might be love, loss, insight, or discomfort. But it's always some kind of net force, tipping the balance. Even the brain reflects this. Neural pathways grow stronger with use. The more often you do something, think a certain thought, react a certain way, fall into the same emotional cycle, the more automatic it becomes. To change that, you have to apply repeated effort in a new direction. One conscious thought might not override the old pattern, but dozens, hundreds, thousands over time can carve a new groove. There's a lovely idea in behavioral psychology called activation energy. It's the mental cost required to initiate a new behavior. Just like starting a rocket, there's a high barrier to overcome at first, but once you're in motion, things get easier. Habits form, motivation increases. What once felt like effort becomes routine. The net force required drops. You've changed direction, and now inertia is on your side. But how do we create these forces? How do we summon enough push to alter our paths? Sometimes it's external, a crisis, a deadline, an opportunity. Life gives us a shove. Other times it's internal, a decision, a moment of courage, a quiet realization that staying still is no longer safe. The key is not waiting for the perfect moment, but building force piece by piece. You don't have to lift the rocket all at once. You start with intention, then consistency, then support, then knowledge. Each piece adds to the total, and one day when the net force is finally enough, you move, and once you move, you keep moving, unless something stops you. That's Newton's first law, in reverse. The same inertia that once held you back now keeps you going. You've built momentum. You've become your own engine. This is why encouragement matters so much. A kind word, a helping hand, a little accountability. These can be the missing force someone needs to tip their balance. Change doesn't require massive resources. Sometimes it just needs enough friction to break stillness. Of course there will be resistance. Always. That's part of the equation too. The world pushes back. Habits push back. People who are uncomfortable with your growth may push back. But if your force exceeds the resistance, you'll keep moving. Maybe not fast, maybe not far at first, but steadily, reliably. You've entered a new trajectory. In physics, we say that net force causes acceleration. Not just motion, but increasing motion, a growing speed. That's the beauty of momentum. It multiplies. Small changes compound. One day of trying becomes two. One voice becomes a chorus. while new thought becomes a belief. Eventually, change feels less like effort and more like flow. You're no longer pushing, you're gliding. It's worth remembering that even the biggest changes often begin with imbalance, a little extra weight on one side, a tug in a new direction, enough to make the old path wobble and the new one begin. Whether it's launching a rocket, changing your career, confronting a broken system, or getting out of bed before the third snooze, it all comes down to forces. What holds you in place and what moves you forward. And in the end, no matter how massive the object or how deep the rut, the rule remains the same. Apply enough net force and you will change direction. It's not a matter of if, just a matter of when and how hard you're willing to push. There's something poetic about the idea of a universe that prefers to coast, a cosmos where motion, once begun, continues undisturbed, where a planet will spin endlessly unless something dares to interfere, where a drifting rock in deep space might wander silently for billions of years, unbothered and unchanged, held in no orbit, responding to no summons, content to drift. Inertia, as we've come to understand it, is not merely a law about motion. It's a quiet preference. The universe, it seems, doesn't really want to do more than it has to. Push something, and it moves. Stop pushing, and it keeps going. Set it still, and there it will sit. Change, it appears, requires effort, and if no one insists, nothing bothers. Which invites the question, is this a lazy universe? Of course, physics would frown at that phrasing. The cosmos is not lazy, it is consistent. But there's something undeniably tranquil about the way it operates. Its laws don't bark orders, they whisper certainties. Inertia, like gravity or time, isn't demanding, it doesn't force things into action, it simply honours what already is. This tendency, to preserve motion, to resist change, is deeply connected to another grand principle, entropy. Entropy is often misunderstood as disorder, but more accurately, it's a measure of how energy spreads out. It's the reason heat flows from hot to cold, never the other way around. It's why your coffee cools, your toast burns, and your perfectly arranged desk inevitably descends into a mild paper-based disaster. Entropy, like inertia, is a kind of cosmic shrug. Left to themselves, systems drift toward equilibrium, hot things cool down, organised things become messy, sharp edges round off. The universe favours balance, not structure. It's not that it hates order, it just doesn't maintain it unless something actively resists the tide. Together, inertia and entropy describe a cosmos that drifts rather than drives, a place where movement is preserved but rarely invented, where structure decays unless something sustains it. It's a bit like walking into an ancient house long since abandoned. The walls are still upright, the furniture hasn't vanished, but the dust gathers, the hinges rust, the floorboards creak, not because anyone broke them, but because nothing stopped the slow, creeping drift towards stillness. And yet, for all this cosmic quiet, the universe is also vibrant, bursting with stars, life, storms, and explosions. Galaxies collide, black holes spin, cells divide, rivers carve canyons. So how do we reconcile these two faces, the still and the dynamic? It helps to remember that motion itself is not the problem. The universe isn't reluctant to move, it just doesn't change its mind without cause. Once motion starts, it's perfectly happy to continue. And that's what makes it so dynamic. There was a beginning. 13.8 billion years ago, the universe exploded into being with what we call the Big Bang. That name is a bit misleading. It wasn't an explosion into space. It was the expansion of space itself, and with it came movement, energy, and a lot of chaos. But from that early burst of motion came everything: matter, radiation, galaxies, gravity, and inertia. That first motion set the tone. Galaxies formed and began rotating. Stars were born and died. Planets spun into place. The momentum of that initial expansion is still unfolding, and inertia has been carrying it forward ever since. We're living in a universe that started in a rush and has never really stopped. only slowed, stretched, and grown quieter. So if the cosmos feels calm now, it's because the initial bang was loud enough to echo forever. What's remarkable is how this inertia expresses itself in every corner of reality. In the path of a comet, in the flick of a falling leaf, in the way a thought once formed tends to recur. We see it in everything from atoms to economies. Once something starts, it wants to keep going, until friction, resistance, or decay steps in. And this raises another question. Is inertia a rule about matter, or is it something deeper? Is it a mechanical quirk, or is it telling us something about the nature of time, of cause and effect? One way to think about it is to view inertia as a kind of memory, not in a conscious sense, but in the way a moving object remembers that it was once pushed. A reminder that history matters, that what happened a moment ago determines what happens next. Every bit of matter in the universe is honouring the past by continuing its path into the future. Inertia's time's signature. That may sound philosophical, but it's grounded in physics. Newton's laws, Einstein's space-time, quantum fields, all of them describe a reality that favours continuity. Things don't vanish without reason. They don't swerve without cause. The present flows from the past like ink from a pen, and inertia is the current carrying it forward. Even life, that glorious oddity, fits into this picture. Organisms resist death the way a planet resists a push. Cells maintain order through energy. We, as living things, are pockets of low entropy, temporary eddies in the cosmic river. But we require constant effort, constant energy, to resist the drift toward equilibrium. When we rest, we don't stop existing. But without energy, without motion, without some spark of internal force, we gradually yield to stillness. That's not tragic, it's natural. It's the quiet default. And yet, we resist. We build cities. We invent languages. We write stories about particles and planets and paradoxes. In doing so, we're applying tiny forces to the grand inertia of existence. Each idea, each innovation is a push, small but meaningful. Perhaps that's why consciousness feels so powerful. It's not just motion reacting to motion, it's awareness choosing a direction. In that light, inertia isn't just about physical objects. It's a metaphor for everything that coasts, drifts, or resists change. Habits, cultures, ideas, even hope. It explains why things tend to continue, and also why change, when it comes, feels so significant. It breaks the flow. It interrupts the silence. And yet change doesn't defy the laws, it obeys them. For something to change direction, a force must be applied. That's not mystical. That's mechanical. It's the same rule whether you're rerouting a spacecraft or rethinking your life. Motion stays motion. Stillness stays still, unless something or someone intervenes. So maybe the universe isn't lazy at all. Maybe it's deliberate. Maybe it prefers consistency because that's what makes structure possible. If objects change speed or direction at random, there would be no stars, no atoms, no logic to anything. Inertia is what makes the universe trustworthy, predictable, safe enough to build things in. And yet, within that safety, there's so much room for play. Inertia lets us coast, but it also gives us something to push against. It allows rest, but permits motion. It resists change, but doesn't forbid it. And in that tension, between stillness and movement, entropy and structure, old paths and new ones, we find the space to exist, to try, to drift, and to decide. So yes, the universe leans toward quiet, toward balance, toward rest, but it also leaves the door open, and every now and then something walks through, an idea, a spark, a moment of movement. And that's where the magic begins. It's funny how something so fundamental, so deeply woven into the fabric of everything, can remain invisible. Inertia is not loud. It doesn't flash or boom or demand attention. It just is, quietly keeping things as they are, guiding planets, cradling galaxies, nudging coffee out of mugs and dreams into motion. It surrounds us, and yet we rarely stop to feel it. But once you see it, really see it, it's everywhere. It's in the rhythm of your walk, in the way your thoughts return to familiar places, in the comfort of a bedtime routine. It's in the motion of the earth beneath your feet, spinning at over 1,000 kilometers per hour, and yet somehow feeling perfectly still. It's in the memories your body carries, the habits that shape your day, and the slow evolution of everything we call home. Inertia doesn't only belong to objects and formulas. It's in life, in nature, in thought. It reminds us that change takes effort, but it also reassures us that motion, once started, is naturally sustained. A bird in flight, a planet in orbit, a new idea finding its way into the world, all obey the same patient rule. Keep doing what you're doing unless something tells you otherwise. And maybe that's part of why we find stillness so comforting. Because even in rest, inertia is still at work. Even in quiet there is movement, tiny invisible currents carrying us forward. A seed lying dormant in winter is still moving through time. A stone sitting in the sun is still turning with the earth. Nothing is ever truly motionless. Not really. Stillness contains motion, just as motion contains stillness. This hidden dance, this paradox of action and pause, is what gives the universe its grace. A falling apple and a soaring comet obey the same laws. A revolution and a raindrop both begin with a force. Even when we feel stuck, we're never truly static. There's always a potential shift, always the possibility of a nudge, a thought, a new beginning. And so, as we come to the end of this gentle exploration, perhaps it's time to return to those small questions. The ones from the beginning of our journey together. Where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it where you are now? Has the day passed while we spoke? Has night wrapped itself round your room, softening the walls and stilling the air? Has your coffee cooled beside you? Has your mind wandered gently, carried not by effort but by quiet understanding? Wherever you are, and whenever it is, I hope this has been a calm companion to your evening. And if it kept you awake, well, I hope you at least learned something along the way. Thank you for spending your time here, letting the invisible forces of the universe unfold around you, slowly and softly. If you found peace or wonder in this moment, feel free to like, to subscribe, or to share where you're from below. It helps this quiet little project keep moving forward, one calm voice at a time. And as always, this is not medical advice, just bedtime physics. Sleep well, curious soul. The universe is still spinning, and you are gently moving with it.